to our Friday meetings. It seems like this is time for everyone to kind of end their week or begin their weekend, I guess, depending on how you're looking at it. Very happy to have you here today. We're very, very fortunate to be having Dr. Clemencia Rodríguez share her work. Before I introduce her, I do want to make mention of the fact that next Monday, November 16th at 10:30, we are going to be, the graduate office is going to be hosting what we're just calling a coffee with the Klein graduate office. And it's basically a time for any of you just to check in with us, because typically in a semester, the graduate office is open and people stop by and they say hello. And in the process of doing that, we catch up, we find out what problems they might have or what things are going their way and what accomplishments they have, and all sorts of little things that we haven't really been able to do organically this semester. So if you want to just stop by and say hello, if you have something you'd like to talk about in terms of the challenges you faced or the solutions you found, or just to say hello, please do. Mia, I believe that email has gone out announcing that, giving a link. We'll probably send out another one on Monday. So please join us at the graduate office next Monday. And again, that will be at 10:30 a.m. And also, this is the penultimate talk. This is our last research talk, though next week, Professor Lance Holbert will be giving a talk on best practices for journal submissions. We're very fortunate to get Lance's knowledge, expertise on this, particularly because he is the editor of one of the major journals within our field, and so has lots of ways in which he can sort of guide us through the things to do and not to do. Now, with that said, let me go ahead and turn over to, introduce and then turn over to our speaker today, which is Dr. Clemencia Rodríguez. Professor Rodríguez is in the Department of Media Studies and Production here at Temple University. Professor Rodríguez and I are longtime friends and colleagues. We did our coursework together at Ohio University back in the late 80s. And she's been an impressive scholar, generating some research that's been really defining within the field, in particular in the area of citizens media. Her book, Fissures in the Mediascape, an international study of citizens media, was published in 2001, where she developed her citizens media theory, a groundbreaking approach to understanding the role of community and alternative media in our societies. Based on fieldwork in regions of Colombia, where leftist guerillas, right-wing paramilitary groups, the army and drug traffickers made their presence felt in the lives of unarmed citizens. She wrote Citizens Media Against Armed Conflict, Disrupting Violence in Colombia, published in 2011 by University of Minnesota Press. Currently, she divides her work between Colombia and Philadelphia, continuing her interest in grassroots media here within Philadelphia. It's an interesting bridge. Her research in Colombia, as you've heard just from my description of her work, centers on citizens media in post-conflict Colombia, and the new focus on environmental communication, how grassroots communities address climate crisis with media and communication. And in Philadelphia, she's exploring the rich history of local media and activist media in youth initiatives that involve media, arts, and digital platforms. So with that, let me please introduce Professor Rodríguez, whose talk is entitled PhillyCAM, a hub for media makers on Ranstead Street.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you everyone for joining us here today, this morning. Can you see my screen? Yeah, yes. Okay. So this is going to be redundant for some of you. I see Sridhar, I see Rosie, and we had a unit about PhillyCAM in our citizens media class, so very redundant for you, sorry. Also, as Patrick said, a lot of my research is in Latin America, Colombia. I'm not going to talk about that, but if you want to ask questions about that at the end in the Q&A, if there's time, I can go over that. So Patrick asked me to talk about the research that I had completed during my sabbatical last year, right before the pandemic. And so that's what I'm gonna do. So, so I did an ethnographic study of PhillyCAM, and the title kind of reflects the main result of my research, which is I found that PhillyCAM is a hub of communication and media makers on Ranstead Street here in downtown Philadelphia. So I want to kind of unpack this title for you. So first of all, I'd like to start by reading from my field journal, just so that give you an idea of the kind of field notes that I took during this research. So I'm saying, let's see if I can change these. Day 1 at PhillyCAM, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Photos on the hallway and bathroom about gender language, responsibilities around washing dishes, keeping the fridge door closed. Met Ricky Clover, who showed me his work, a 12-minute animation about a high school kid who gets his hair weird because some chemical products fall on his head. The drawings are good and completely local. Typical Philly row houses, the septa buses with their typical blue and red colors, the bridge over the river. And so this is the kind of note-taking that I did on a daily basis, you know, hours and hours and hours spent in the building, and hours and hours and hours of immediate note-taking after I spent time there. But I want to, before I dive into the research, I want to stop for a minute about and kind of disclose or present my epistemological approach. So so this is ethnographic work. I spent approximately 100 hours inside the PhillyCAM building on Ranstead Street, 400 feet from the Liberty Bell. And this epistemological approach is part, obviously, of the many ways in which humans build knowledge, produce knowledge. And my own epistemological approach is that all human knowledge is precarious. There are numerous ways to produce human knowledge, but none of them is going to give you the ultimate perfect truth. They're all flawed and they're all precarious. So my own epistemological approach is interpretive research. I collect evidence, empirical data to better understand social reality, and I want to stress the term understand. So I don't want to predict social reality, I want to understand social reality, and I publish my research to kind of share my own understanding of that social reality and put my understanding of that social reality in dialogue with other understandings of the same social reality. I use ethnography, which assumes that the human body becomes a data collecting device where all sensory experience becomes data. So the smells, the colors, the sounds, everything that you experience during your ethnographic fieldwork is sensory empirical data that it goes into building knowledge about that social reality. Now, this is very different from other ways to produce human knowledge. For example, human knowledge that implies transforming social reality into measurable data. For example, statistical analysis, or transforming complex human experiences into discrete units of analysis. For example, using Likert scales. But again, in my own epistemological approach, all these human knowledges are flawed and precarious. And I want to push the envelope a little bit more. The ones that I've talked about so far, mathematical and statistical epistemological approaches, and ethnographic epistemological approaches, critical epistemological approaches, they all belong to the Western tradition of social science research. But I want to kind of push the envelope to kind of make us aware that outside of Western epistemologies, there are many non-Western epistemologies that were able to survive what now post-colonial scholars are calling epistemicide, the destruction of indigenous, native, African, and Asian ways to produce knowledge. And now there's a whole turn in academia to shift towards rediscovering these other epistemologies, sometimes called epistemologies of the South, and reinstate those epistemologies into academia in an effort to decolonize our curricula. And so all these to kind of put all this epistemological discussion into perspective. And to end this part of the presentation, I think if there are questions that are focused or centered on why my epistemological research is valid or not valid, those questions should be posed in a forum about epistemology and not a discussion about research studies. So it would, because those questions, as we have so little time for question and answer, those questions are equivalent to me going to a quantitative research presentation and asking the researcher to defend why they're using mathematics to construct human knowledge. So I don't think that's the place where these questions belong. Okay, finish my epistemological ranting. So one of the most important aspects of ethnographic research is building a relationship with the community where you are going to insert yourself to do ethnography. And I started building a relationship with PhillyCAM 3 months after I moved to Philadelphia. So these photos are taken from 2016 to 2019. I moved to Philadelphia and joined Temple in 2016. And I did the ethnography in 2019. The photo where I'm on the television screen is from actually October of 2016. So 3 months after I moved here. And basically they found out that a community media researcher was moving to Philadelphia. And so they started asking me to participate in different events and to go talk about community media in Latin America, to talk about community media in context of war, to talk about community radio in the third world or the global South. So all these photos, and the photo at the top, I'm in one of the television shows, which was a panel about community media. Down below, I'm with Antoine Haywood on the my left, who at the time was outreach coordinator for PhillyCAM. On the photo on the right, I'm with Vanessa Maria Graver, who's the director of the community radio station, which is part of PhillyCAM. So as you can see, a lot of relationship building, and relationship building basically in their turn. So whatever they needed, I said, yes, I'll do it for you. And so obviously 3 years after I said yes to this and that and this other thing, I already had a good relationship where when I asked for authorization to insert myself every day among them, then I obtained their permission to be there. So what is PhillyCAM? PhillyCAM is a public access television channel. Public access channels are part of what is known as PEG channels. public, educational, and government channels. And apart from this public access channel, Philadelphia has 5 educational channels and 1 government channel. So where do these channels come from? When they sign a franchise agreement with cable companies, city municipalities, city governments demand PEG channels in exchange for using the rights of way to run the television company's cables. So this is part of the cable regulatory framework in the United States. When this is regulated by the FCC, when a cable company wants to use the rights of way in a city to do business, the city can demand that cable television company to sponsor and finance and set up certain television channels for the use of the city, for public use, educational use, or city government use. Some city governments demand these of cable companies and others don't. So in the case of Philadelphia, Philadelphia demanded these from Comcast and Verizon, but the companies were very reluctant to support the PEG channels. And it took media activists 27 years to get Comcast and Verizon to support the public access channel. Finally, they took the case to court. After 27 years, the court sided with local activists and forced the cable companies to abide by it and made it retroactive. So the PEG, the access channel got a bunch of money, and that's why the city of Philadelphia has this amazing building in city center with all kinds of television equipment. And more recently, they got a community radio station with a license, an FM license on the 3rd floor. So it's kind of these public, is for the public, for everyone, open door policy, community television station at the bottom floor and community radio station on the top floor. So the franchise agreement between the city of Philadelphia and the cable companies include monthly fees that support PhillyCAM. So when cable subscribers pay the monthly fee, one minute amount actually goes to support PhillyCAM. But this can change any minute, and actually the city has been trying to pocket that money and saying that they're going to use it in a better way than PhillyCAM. So this is something that we all need to be aware of, because the PhillyCAM is at risk of being defunded all the time. And so it's going to be up to the citizens of Philadelphia to come out and defend PhillyCAM, not only against the cable companies, but also the city government that wants to kind of pocket that money. By the way, the whole thing is called PhillyCAM, but as I said, it has 1 community television venue and 1 community radio. So WPPE, People Power Radio, is the PhillyCAM community radio station. It's a low power FM radio station, and it broadcasts on 106.5. So I don't know why this is, okay. Wait. So, I want to, I'm missing a slide. Okay, so I want to basically talk about the sections. I actually already wrote, I didn't think I was going to be able to write kind of the final research report about this ethnography, but thanks to COVID, I couldn't go back to the field to do field work in the summer. And so I sat down with my hours and hours and hours of interviews and field notes and documents, etc. And I produced the final product, the final report on the ethnography, which, you know, is the first time where I wrote it between June and July, and in August I started class. And so it was one of the readings for the class. So straight out of the oven into the classroom, which was pretty neat. And so I'm gonna I'm gonna go over the sections in the ethnography report. And the first section is PhillyCAM as a hub for community media producers dialogue. And so I'm going to read to you a little bit of that section that starts like this. It's September 30, 2019, and I'm hanging out with Sarina Lomax, host of Talking the Walk, a television program about the experiences of people of color who have lost loved ones to gun violence. Sarina and her crew of longtime PhillyCAM members, Earl Weeks, Charles Clark, and Donald Butler, are preparing to shoot this week's episode. Somehow, 3 large pizzas appear out of the blue. I never found out where they came from or who ordered them. They're sitting on a large table in the hallway, so we start eating. Vanessa and Maria Graber, the station manager of WPPM, PhillyCAM's community radio station, walks by and stops to introduce a young African-American. He's a Drexel student doing an internship with WPPM. Gretchen Klausing, PhillyCAM's executive director, walks by with Maria, a young journalist from Belgrade in Serbia, doing a fellowship with PhillyCAM as part of the US State Department program. Gretchen and Maria join our group near the pizza, and Maria tells us that in Serbia, community media does not exist. Zarina tells Maria about her television program on which mothers of young people who have been lost to gun violence tell their stories and talk about their pain and their process of healing after the murders of their children. This snapshot of my days doing ethnographic observations at PhillyCAM reflects what I experience every time I walk into the building. It is a busy hub of conversations, collaborations, and other interactions, all centered around media making. I first stepped inside PhillyCAM's 3-story building on October 2016, 3 months after I moved to Philadelphia. My first impression was that the building was a meeting place for local media makers, young and old, white and people of color, queer, cisgender, groomed and ungroomed, coming and going, carrying tripods, microphones, cameras, sitting around the building's many social areas, sharing ideas and experiences as radio and television producers. Located on Ranstead and 7th Street in the very center of the city, just a block from the iconic Liberty Bell, PhillyCAM's building hosts an explosion of participatory media. I wonder what behind the scenes elements made this dynamic space possible, and then I decided to explore every corner of the building to discover the conditions and human processes that contribute to PhillyCAM's buzzing hive. So that's kind of the setup of the ethnographic work. And here you can see some photos of what the everyday life inside the building is like. So another section is about who are the producers at PhillyCAM. And so here's 2 photos. Alonso Jennings, who produces a music show. He's a jazz aficionado, and so he's all about jazz, and so his program is called Jazz from an Eclectic Mind. And Zarina Lomax, who produces Talking the Walk, which is this program where every week is a weekly show. These are all weekly shows. Every week is 1 episode where she talks to mostly the mothers of people who have been lost to gun violence and police brutality. And so, so that's another one of the producers. Here's other photos of producers of PhillyCAM. The one at the bottom with the blue shirt, that's Ricky Clover, who I mentioned when I started, and he's the producer of that animation program. And so some of my section on these, on the PhillyCAM's programmers and who they are, the conclusions of that section is that they mirror Philadelphia. So there's 79 radio producers in WPPM, and I don't know, 80 television producers. And so the diversity is amazing. So if you look at the programming grid of the radio station and the television station, and if you look at the socio-cultural map of Philadelphia, they basically mirror each other. PhillyCAM's programmers are all passionate about media and communication. So the one thing that brings people to PhillyCAM is their passion about media and communication, and they're never happy with being an audience of media. They want to be a producer of their own media narratives. They want to produce narratives about their own communities. They have very critical view of how the mainstream media narrate and show or represent, portray their communities. And so they want to produce their own media narratives about the communities. They share the conviction that media making is a right, not a privilege. They're very aware that they have a voice. So I'm always fighting against this conception of community media as the voice of the voiceless. No, people have a voice, and these people are very aware that everyone has a voice and that everyone has something to say, and that PhillyCAM is the place where people can go to express that voice. And they're embedded in our various communities all over the city and even beyond the city. Alonso Jennings, for example, he comes every week from New Jersey. There's many producers who live in Camden, and you know, there's like the greater Philly area. Here's more of the producers, and all these photos are from the annual CAMI Awards, which is a whole thing in itself. I could have done a whole chapter on the CAMI Awards. Is the annual awards for producers, radio and television. Another section of the ethnography is PhillyCAM as mirror of our community. And so here's another section of the report. In early November, the station managers agreed to let me attend PhillyCAM's annual television producers retreat held in Center City. I leave home early, but as is typical with SEPTA, my train from Mount Airy is canceled because of tree trimming. By the time I finally arrive, everyone is already immersed in group sessions. There are about 50 people in the room, and once again, the majority are people of color. So previously, I have said in the report that I'm in this training session and the majority are people of color. I'm with the youth media makers and the majority are people of color. So this is something that comes up again and again throughout the ethnography. I realize this is the only media circle I've encountered in Philadelphia with the majority non-white membership. Since moving to the city in 2016 to take a faculty position at Temple University, I have been an active participant in various initiatives that bring together media owners, producers, journalists, and media researchers. I have experience with the Temple's Klein College of Media and Communication, the University of Pennsylvania Center for Advanced Research in Global Communication, and the leftist Institute. In all these spaces are populated by a white majority with a few people of color. At PhillyCAM is the opposite. I always find myself in a room where people of color are the majority. And in my own experience with all kinds of media circles, this is the only circle in Philadelphia where I experienced this. Another section is about youth making media, and here's a photo of the radio production team. And this was a fascinating part of the ethnography, watching these youth dialogue and put together a radio program, decide on what the theme was. So I got them at the very beginning where they were just developing. They didn't even know what the program was going to be about. And little by little, out of amazing chaos where at the beginning, I was like, there's no way a radio program emerges from this chaos, but somehow it did. And then I followed them throughout the whole thing until the program went on the air. And it was an amazing program about music. So the entire program they decided was going to be about music. And each episode of the radio program was going to be about one aspect of music, and all the programs focused on how music intersects with issues in their own lives, mental health issues, career path issues, self-esteem issues, racial tension issues. I mean, all kinds of very serious subjects. And it was really eye-opening to see they're all in high school, these high schoolers. The woman in the middle actually is the coordinator, so she's a PhillyCAM staff. And so it was amazing to see them delve into very sophisticated ways to reflect about their everyday lives. They also had guests in their shows, etc. And I want to read you just one of the conversations that they had in one of the shows. So this is Shermina Smith, and she's saying, I self-proclaim that I am an angry Black woman. I think sometimes our anger is weaponized against ourselves and we're not allowed to be angry. And I wanted to artistically display that and embody the rage that isn't us, but that made us who we are. And I think it's very important to not hide that, because anger has created movement. And if we hide our anger, it's a disrespect to ourselves and a disrespect to everything we stand for. You are feeling things for a reason. Emotion is movement, and if you subdue it, you're going to be stalling. And so this is, from their radio program. So PhillyCAM has several youth initiatives, radio production, youth making radio, youth making television, and these initiatives typically operate as after-school programs. So the kids get to PhillyCAM at around 3:30, 4, and they stay there until about 7. And they work with the youth coordinators. So there's about 3 or 4 different youth coordinators, and they who lead or facilitate the media production training in television, emergent media. So they were, at one point they were working with the 360 camera, radio. One of the things that, for example, I miss, that is like, there's not enough resources, is journalism. So they do a lot of television production, but they're not doing any kind of youth journalism, citizen reported, community reporting, etc. Okay. So another section is called PhillyCAM as incubator for hyperlocal storytelling. And I'm always saying that the value of community media is that it fills the void of hyperlocal media content. And so this whole section is an analysis of how the programming is hyperlocal. So the universe is the city of Philadelphia, and actually the focus is like this intersection of two streets and what's happening there, what's happening inside the neighborhood, what's happening inside the community. Like saying North Philly would be too wide in PhillyCAM. You actually have to narrow down to the exact 3 or 4 blocks. People always talk about in hyperlocal terms about the universe that is Philadelphia. So wanted to show you a couple examples. These 2 images are from Marky, that animation that I talked about at the beginning, and you saw the producer, Ricky Clover. And so as you can see the typical row houses. So his animation is totally 100% inspired by the row houses in Philadelphia, the stoops in the cities, in the neighborhood. He has a map. I just took screenshots of the animation. Here's a couple more. So he's on the septa bus, the main character. On the picture on the left, on the picture of the right, you have the typical septa colors and the typical landscape that those of us who live here navigate on a daily basis. So it's media that reflects your everyday experience. You know, you go into these media narratives, and then when you go into the street and experience Philadelphia, there's synchrony there. They're talking about the same thing. So each of these sections I could go on, and I'm hoping that I'm watching my time here, that you want to talk about this, I can expand on these. Here's another entry point into the hyperlocal media narrative. So for example, this is one of the guests at Talking the Walk that show about the people who were lost to gun violence by Zarina Lomax. The photograph is Kim Kamara, and she lost her son Neem. He was murdered on July 7, 2017. Each day her family still goes through the pain for their loss, but she has transformed this pain into purpose. And this is one of the interesting angles of this program, is not about victimhood. So Zarina always features her guests as, yes, going through the pain and the loss, but always overcoming that or using the pain to reach levels of experience that they hadn't had before. And this is a good example. So Kim is the author of a children's book about what it means to lose your dad to gun violence. And each week, Zarina showcases a local Philadelphian who has been impacted by gun violence and police brutality. Most of them are moms. So I've seen many of these episodes, and she, not by policy, but you know, it turns out that most of them are moms. And Zarina's focus is always on the resilience and the resistance, not only on the pain and the loss of the guests. Another section of the ethnography is about how the physical spaces incubate an alternative ethos. And this is because my own background, you know, I've been doing research on community media for so many years, 20 some years. And I've learned that this is a very important aspect of community media that really want to be community incubators, where, you know, things happen differently inside certain community media because they set things up differently. So a lot of my learning actually comes from the universe of indigenous media. For example, Aboriginal radio stations have a way to design the studios actually according to Aboriginal life worlds. And so when people in Sydney send them the plans for the studios, Aboriginal leaders were like, no, I mean, this has nothing to do with who we are. And so they trashed those plans and they redesigned the building itself to kind of embrace Aboriginal principles of community, togetherness, expression, the respect for the ancestors, the role of the ancestors in media making, media narratives, etc. In another case, for example, big learning moment for me, it's a community radio station in Mexico, also geared towards an audience, a community of mainly farmers and indigenous people. And they realized that the community radio station, which was operating in the center of a small town, like no one came in, even though it was like right in the center next to the market, lots of traffic coming and going around the radio station, but no one came in. And then at some point they realized they had put these shiny white tiles on the floor of the radio station. And they realized that people were intimidated because they came in with muddy shoes, and you know, they came from their fields, etc. And so they were embarrassed of dirtying that shiny white floor. So the leaders behind the community radio station decided to replace the floor and put some, you know, just cement or something like that. And immediately that contributed to increasing participation and traffic inside the radio station. So for me, the way the community media space is set up is always very important, and I'm always paying a lot of attention to that. So there's a whole section on the ethnography on how the building is set up. In the PhillyCAM, the social spaces are central. So when they designed the building, they allocated a lot of footage for different collective spaces where people can collaborate, dialogue, hang out, just, you know, do nothing, just be together in the hopes that something will emerge once people are together. And there's all kinds of signs everywhere in the space that speak about the alternative ethos that PhillyCAM is. For example, you know, in these huge letters over this internal window, line dancers, sportscasters, vegan chefs, and poet laureates do their thing at PhillyCAM. And a lot of other signs that actually contribute to this collective ethos where this is ours and we take care of it. It's for us, but we need to kind of protect the cleanliness of the place. And the so they're always insisting on this is a collective place, but we have to all be, you know, be committed to its maintenance. This is the building, and another thing that is really interesting is how the first street level is mostly windows. And so there's many people, many television producers and radio producers who became radio producers because they walked by and they saw people like them inside. So the windows is a strategic device to draw people in, because they can see what's happening inside, and they see many people and people dressed like them. Racially, they look like them. Class-wise, they look like them. And so that inspires them to just open the door and go inside and ask, what's this about? Now, when they go inside and ask what is this about, the person they find on the front desk is most of the time is Sophie. And little by little, I learned that everyone, the person at the front desk, the people in charge of loaning equipment to PhillyCAM members, the facilitators, the trainers, everyone goes through training based on this alternative ethos. And it's an alternative ethos centered on listening, and kind of assuming that everyone can become a media maker. So I want to read a little bit of my interview with Sophie when she explains this to me. Sophie is the person at the front desk. When people come through the door, I take them at face value, kind of like, we're just having a dialogue. They're just talking to me about things they want to do or are interested in. Then from there, the walls go down and everyone is comfortable. And they feel that someone is listening to them, that someone understands what they want to do. Like some people come in and they just want the basic information, but some others come in with, I have this idea. And they go on and on and on, and you just have to give them that, listen. And I just talk to people and they kind of draw me into their project. And then it's even better because they're like, oh, I got someone interested. You have to engage with them at the level they're engaging with you. If they're talking, let them talk. And if they're not, leave them their space. It's all about giving the attention that they need to whatever degree, from the smallest to listening for an hour until they explain their whole plan, because they will sit for hours and I listen because I feel that this is their process. And at the end of the day, we're all artists and every artist has a different process and you have to give them all that respect. And so I say, I learned that every staff person, instructor, facilitator, and equipment room facilitator at PhillyCAM goes through training that emphasizes listening, meeting people where they are, and assuring anyone who comes in that no matter who they are or their level of ability, PhillyCAM is for them. But this is easier said than done. I mean, you can have this on paper, but to actually implement it and make it happen involves training people, designing the space, having the right equipment, having the right pedagogical and training processes. I mean, it's a whole bunch of human processes that are kind of like behind the scenes that make this happen. So I think I only have one section, which is on community journalism and PhillyCAM. And I want to start with a story. So there's two journalism initiatives at PhillyCAM. One, which is called Voices and is English journalism, and one in Spanish called Atrévete. So there's two teams, one in the English program and one in the Spanish program, and they each have a professional journalist coordinator, and the team is all volunteers. So the Atrévete team, a few months ago throughout the pandemic, their weekly show, news show, feature a woman called Carmela Polonio Hernandez, and she's an immigrant from Honduras, and she had been living inside the church in Germantown for 18 months because she's part of a sanctuary program. She doesn't have documents to be legally in the United States, and so the minute she leaves the church, she's at risk of being deported back to Honduras. So she has lived in that church for 18 months. This is a show that was broadcast in about, let's see, we're in November, about October of this year, like 2 months ago, last month, or yeah, in September, October. And so what's interesting to me is that I see these and I'm like, oh my God, these embedded Spanish-speaking journalist found someone who has had the experience we're all going through of being locked at home, but this woman started like a year before us. So she has a lot to teach us. And so they ask her, you know, in this news show, So how have you survived being inside the church for 18 months? Can you tell us about, and she gives an interview on, you know, what we can all learn from her own experience. And I want to read to you only one part of that news story. And so she says, I have survived with my plants. I have my plants, and you may not believe it, but they give me so much strength. I have lemon trees, aloe plants, also guajele, which you may not know, also roses and medicinals. And taking care of my plants gives me so much strength. And I'm transforming the church into a jungle and planting so many plants. I also started embroidering, taking so many things I've known since childhood. I did not know how to crochet, but I learned. I tell you, technology is so amazing. That YouTube, this is all in Spanish. I translated it to you, for you. I learned how to crochet earrings thanks to YouTube. And then every Tuesday, I have a video call with many other people who, like me, are living in sanctuary. And each of us talks about what we're doing, how we're passing the time. I also spend time learning from the sanctuary movement, learning from their conferences and chats. They teach you all kinds of things. You wouldn't believe how much I've learned. And so, you know, here's someone who has that experience that we've all had to endure these years because of COVID. And then she's featured in the newscast because the journalists are embedded in the community. And so they know of her. And so this is kind of the value of community reporting, community journalists. So I just have a little bit more about the two teams, Voices and Atrévete. They're both teams of embedded community reporters, but they have a coordinator, editor, who's a professional journalist. Atrévete, for me, is a pioneer in the Latinx Mediascape because it's a show that assumes itself as a bilingual show. So everything is available in Spanish and English, and it's really where the Latinx community is moving. It's going to be a bilingual community. It's not a exclusively Spanish-speaking community. It's also a pioneer because it's a multinational news show. Typically, Latinx media are either Mexican-American or Puerto Rican or Colombian, but here the team is about 13 community reporters, and they're from Colombia, Mexico, Puerto Rico, Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, etc. And they work together. So they're kind of a diasporic and multinational team. They're also multi-generational. There are people who are in their 70s and there are people who are in their 20s. And they focus on US Latinx issues, but also Latin American issues. So they go back and forth between what's happening in Latin America and what's happening in the US. Just to finish, this is one of the weakest aspects. It's very precarious because of lack of resources. So the community reporters are not compensated, which in my view will never work, will never produce a sustainable, strong community reporting initiative. They're all volunteers, and so it's a revolving door. There's not enough training. Similar community reporting initiatives in Colombia that I've explored include 4 months of full-time training, like 9 to 5. And at PhillyCAM, they've had 10 hours of training. And they're not supported by all the journalism organizations and institutions in the city. They're not supported by the legacy media. They're not supported by the universities. They're not supported by the foundations. They're not supported by City Hall. And unless we all support them, it's not going to be a strong, sustainable we have the potential to have two teams, one a Spanish speaking and the other one English focused, of embedded community reporters. And if we all supported them, it would be an amazing asset for the city of Philadelphia and our local landscape. I'm so glad David is here listening to this. Okay, I'm gonna leave it there and see what you have to say about these. Thank you.
You don't need insurance. Students can initiate.
Ashley, I see are you trying to ask a question there?
Either they're walking out.
No, I think she's unmuting.
Oh, okay. She muted and unmuted. A lot of screens. Please just go ahead and put your hand up or jump in. We got a few minutes left.
Ali, I see Ali.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi.
That was a great presentation, by the way, and
Thank you.
actually really intriguing and knowledgeable, because I always enjoy learning about foreign people, well, not just people, but foreign experiences, because I'm foreign myself and everybody's experience is always different. And I always hear different stories about dealing with immigrations and stuff like that. So that's really intriguing. But I wanted to ask about the PhillyCAM. What's the overall goal besides like it being a safe space for someone to share their ideas and stuff like that, and you guys listening?
Yeah, their overall goal is to offer a media production initiative where everyone in Philadelphia can become a media producer and produce their own media.
Okay.
So if you go to one of the commercial radio stations, they're not going to open the door for you to produce your own radio show. Or if you go to ABC, they're not going to open the door for you to produce your own television. So PhillyCAM is filling that void of offering the possibility to anyone in the greater Philadelphia region, to become a media producer.
Got it. Thank you.
Bob?
Yeah, I have a very practical question. When you're doing that work, how do you deal with IRB approval and kind of more generally with any issues of informed consent when you're doing the informal interviews?
Yeah, so my work is typically, well, I do the informed consent through IRB, and then I actually always ask for verbal informed consent, because I know that in communities asking people to sign something is very tricky. So, but you can do verbal informed consent. So when I'm beginning the interview, the first thing I do is the informed consent, and I record when they say, yes, I give you consent. And then what later, when I wrote the report, I wasn't sure if people wanted their names mentioned, like their first name, last name, or if they wanted me to anonymize that. And so with the help of the PhillyCAM staff, we consulted with all the producers. That took like a month and a half of consultations. And except for 2 who never responded, everyone wanted their name and last name in the report. So yeah, so the report is very explicit.
Great, thank you. That's really useful.
Thanks for that question. Mitch? And then
Hi, thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. I wanted to ask, what are some avenues to push for support? like how might one do that kind of work? Like I saw you listed like who we might expect to support PhillyCAM, but I guess how would just anyone go about?
Yeah, the main thing is making noise, because I think one of the main reasons it's not supported better is because people don't know, no one knows about it. Very few people know about it. And, you know, I mean, they don't have all the resources in the world, so they cannot dedicate time and energy and resources to promote PhillyCAM. That would be kind of another thing to do, right? They already are like, I mean, like Vanessa Maria Graver, right, the director of the radio station, she on her own manages 79 idiosyncratic, loud, mouthy radio producers, which to me, it's amazing that she can do that, and the operation works fairly well and smoothly. So, so to ask the staff of PhillyCAM to promote PhillyCAM among city government, the universities, Leftist, the other foundations, the Leeway Foundation is absurd. I mean, they don't have the capacity to do that. So it's up to the rest of us. That's why I did the research in part. And, you know, it was great that I was able to write it, do the ethnography, write it, thanks to COVID, very quickly and get it out. So for example, we used it in 2 classes already, my grad class and Sridhar's undergrad class. I mean, that was one of the required readings. And also I fed it to the board of directors of the Independence Public Media Foundation. Of course, I gave it to PhillyCAM. And so they fed it to their board, and they're sending it out to other boards of, you know, so the report itself, this research, and that's when research really makes me really happy, when I can use it. It can be used for actual practical things that are going to change reality, right? And they contribute to social change. So making noise and promoting it, all of us at the university level, in our media consumption choices with our neighbors, and, you know, any way that you can in social media is follow them on social media. It would help. The more we can do for people in Philadelphia to know that this exists and what it does and the role it plays and the potential it has, which is not realized at all.
Wonderful. Thank you.
We're about out of time, but I want to invite folks to stick around. I know other people have to go to class, and we have a question from Gabby Cruz. So for those of you that want to continue the conversation, we'll keep going. And with that, Gabby, floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Well, thank you for your presentation. It was very insightful. I just had a quick question about how COVID-19 has affected the way that PhillyCAM works and the way that these media producers have been trying to collaborate with one another since the pandemic has begun.
Yeah, that was really bittersweet, because this year they were supposed to celebrate their 10th anniversary. And so they had so much planned to celebrate the 10th year, and they had to shut down. As you can imagine, that hive of human interaction was like the least conducive, right, during the pandemic. So they basically shut down in March, and they reopened with new COVID protocols about a month or a month and a half ago. and on a minimum, you know, like they cannot allow more than so many people in the building at a time, and they have all kinds of protocols. So they're to a minimum right now, and but they survive, which is amazing, you know. And also they started doing a lot of training for people to produce at home, and so they redirected all their training to home production of radio and video and, you know, all kinds of things. So for example, that interview that I read to you with the woman who's on Sanctuary, that was done remotely. That news show was all remotely. So they have continued working, but it's been very, very difficult. On the other hand, and this is the part of bittersweet, this is the sweet part of it, they were so glad I did the ethnography in 2019. So, you know, I finished the ethnography in December, like mid-December 2019, and then 2 months later, they had to shut down. So they were so glad that I was there at the right time.
I see. Thank you so much for answering. Thank you.
Yeah.
Clemencia, can I ask you a question to kind of link this research to your, you know, what you've done over the last 20 some years? You started the talk off with talking about epistemology and understanding. What is it about this particular case study, your work at PhillyCAM, that you learned from and added to that understanding in relation to your sort of the broader body of scholarship that you've done over the years?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Patrick. Excellent. So most of my research has been done in rural areas, in Latin America, in Catalonia, in Colombia, Nicaragua, Chile, the US, but it's my first time doing, and you know, I'm a city person. I mean, I was born in Bogota and grew up in a 10 million people city, but I still, it's the first time that I do research on a very hyper urban community media initiative, and it's a totally different ball game. I mean, at the beginning, I was just like overwhelmed with the diversity of dialects and accents. And, you know, with the community media that I'm familiar with is very homogeneous, because these are small rural communities where people are more or less homogeneous culturally, racially, you know. But PhillyCAM is just an explosion of racial difference and ways of speaking English and class and neighborhoods, and which, you know, the balance of making sure the space is embraces diversity, but at the same time doesn't explode in chaos is amazing. So the staff have found this way to balance kind of rules, you know, that they maintain, and they remind people all the time, you know, like, no, you cannot bring live chickens into the studio. Or no, it's the 4th of July, we know, but you cannot throw fireworks in the radio studio to get the sound live, you know. I mean, because all the idiosyncrasies of Philadelphians are gonna be in the studios, and you never know what people are gonna come up with. And you want the PhillyCAM people wanna respect that there's space for all that diversity and idiosyncrasy, but that the building is not burned down, or, you know, something horrible happens. So I learned one of the most amazing things, or probably, is and you cannot see these, you know. I mean, it's very invisible, this way of maintaining like organized chaos, if you want it. And it's very they very strategic. So, you know, they meet, I mean, the staff of PhillyCAM and the leadership of PhillyCAM, they meet around the table and they're like, okay, how are we going to do this? And they're always reflecting on their principles, you know, embracing the idiosyncrasies of the city, but at the same time, not letting all that diversity kind of destroy the place. And so they're very strategic on designing policies and procedures and ways of training the staff and ways of training the producers into how to do things. And so that to me was very, very, very new.
I'm muted, sorry. That seems like, you know, that's the kind of thing you could reflect on quite a while, that sense of productive chaos, or however you would sort of frame it. The managing of this diversity within a dynamic cityscape.
Exactly.
Any other questions, folks?
Yeah, I had a quick one, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Clemencia. Thanks. That was a really great presentation. I'm just wondering, can you elaborate a bit on the different kinds of roles that might be available for people to take? Like, I was part of a community radio station in a small town in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, and they would let sometimes producers switch to hosting, switch to doing directing programming over the summer, things like that. So can you elaborate at all if that type of interchangeability of roles occurred there?
Yeah, so I didn't go into this because I only had an hour, but PhillyCAM has, you know, a lot of these procedures in place for bringing people in. So the first thing that happens is that you have to do an introduction to PhillyCAM. And so that's one afternoon, or it's a couple hours. If people still are interested, because sometimes, for example, people think that they are going to use the equipment and PhillyCAM to produce stuff for commercial ventures. And PhillyCAM is not that. So that once they find out what it is about, then some people are like, okay, this is not for me. And so very quickly in that first session, the people who are really interested go on to the second level, which is it's a kind of a, what's it called, orientation session. And if you're interested in television, you do the television orientation. If you're interested in radio, you do the radio orientation. And if you don't know, you can do the television orientation and the radio orientation. And then once you pass that level, then you take a class. And that class is, it can be radio production 101 or television production 101. And each time you take a class, you're certified. And then you can go to another level. And then another level. So every time you take a class, you're certified. And at some point, I think after 2 classes, the 2 certifications allow you to propose your own show. And so there's a whole procedure for proposing your own television show or your own radio show. But if you don't want to propose your own show, but you want to be part of a crew of somebody else's show, then there's another procedure for that. Or for example, some people have shot a lot of footage and all they want is editing, right? And so they take the editing class, they get certified in editing, and then they can go straight into using the equipment to edit whatever footage they come in. So they have all these procedures in place to allow people to come in different roles. So you can be a crew into somebody's production. You can propose your own show and, you know, do your own show, or you can do only part of something, you know, like for example, editing something that is that is never going to come out on the air. It's not going to be broadcast. So there's different entry points, and then you choose. And once people are in, they change. So for example, someone produced a show for 2 years, but they got tired, but they still want